This evening, we are going to talk about Anthony T Rodrigues', if I said that plural possessive correct, new book,
Uh-huh.
Gemini. I am the publisher of the book, gutenbookpress.com. And this is our inaugural title. Gutenbook Press is actually an imprint of a larger, or I should say different publishing enterprise, the Athantos Publishing Group. And we're pleased to have Anthony as our first title under this new imprint. We're hoping it'll be like a fine bottle of wine broke over the bow of a ship and bring everyone success and favor. How are you doing this
Well,
evening?
well, I hope so. I'm doing fine. I mean, we finally have some cool weather here in Texas. We've had a terrible summer, as you may have read. And
Yeah.
so we're very happy to have cool weather. But, this is the best time of the year in Texas. I love fall and I love winter.
Okay. Because of the temperature?
Yes, because everything is sort of cool and pleasant. If you remember, I used to live in Michigan,
Yes.
and I remember what winters were like up there. And all I can say is Texas winters are delightful, usually, anyway. Except, of course, periodically we get really bitter cold. And I have
Sure.
no idea why, but we seem to. But most of the time we have really nice weather. We can sit outside and have a margarita or whatever we want to do. And it's a pleasant place to live. I love Texas, actually.
Well, I'm still stuck in Wisconsin, so it's getting colder and colder every day, and I'm getting
Uh-huh.
grumpier and grumpier and crabbier. But we won't think about that right now.
No, we won't. I still have my Michigan coat in my wardrobe over there, and I don't wear it anymore, but
Uh,
I still
yeah,
have it.
I'm a little bit jealous. So we're gonna be
Yeah,
talking about your book. I have a copy right here, Gemini. And
yeah.
is this the first book that you've ever had published?
It's the first book I've ever had published. Yes,
Okay.
it's not the first book I've written. I've
Oh,
actually
right.
written three books.
Okay.
This is the third book I wrote. Um, I wrote a science fiction book first of all, which I think was it had good parts and bad parts. And
Okay.
unfortunately, it's a typical example of the first book you ever write.
Sure.
You don't really have control of your medium, so as a result, you you flounder a little. And I think that's what happened. I mean, when I look back on it, I find parts I really liked and parts I really disliked. And the plot I just didn't have control over. Then I decided to write a book set in the late third century of the Roman Empire in Britain. And that book, I think, worked out pretty well. I haven't published it yet, but it's the first part of what I hope will be a trilogy. This is the second part, and it follows a family in Britain through three generations. At least that's how I envision it. So it, it's a long-term project.
Okay. So why don't you explain the British part? It's not just modern day Britain that you have in mind. The backdrop of this
No,
series
no.
is more ancient times. Go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Well, I have always been interested in the Roman Empire. And as a result, all through my childhood and later, I read lots and lots of books on the topic. In fact, I even considered going into archaeology as my profession. But in the end, linguistics drew me more, so I ended up in that. However, this didn't change the fact that I loved archaeology. And I don't know if you ever heard of an author called Rosemary Sutcliffe, but she wrote children's books. And I think they are some of the best children's books I've ever read. And they are mainly set in Britain during the time of the Roman Empire. And as a result, I became fascinated by that period. So I read a lot about it. And after I became a little wealthier, shall we say, I started going to Britain to see what was actually there. And I spent a lot of time going to different villas and forts and all these different things in Rome and Britain. And I stumbled across a villa in Kent called Lullingston, and it's held by the National Trust. You can visit it to this day if you wish to. And I was fascinated by the fact that they seemed to have been held by a family for at least 100, 150, maybe 200 years. And you can see the development of the family just through the archaeological record from around about, probably 250 AD until somewhere in the 4th and 5th century. In fact, this family ultimately became Christian. They started out clearly as pagan. However, by the end of the villa's lifetime, they had clearly become Christian because there were Christian motifs all over the place. Anyway, I was fascinated by this because I thought, what exactly happened to this family? How did this happen? And what was going on in this family? Then I discovered something that was even more astonishing. On a hill above this villa is a temple, or at least was a temple. And underneath the floor of this temple, they had buried 2 young people. They were young. We could tell they were young. A man and a woman. And the woman's grave had been robbed in antiquity. However, the man's grave had not been. So there was a lot of stuff there which seemed to indicate that they had been buried together, even with games so they could play in the afterlife. The thing that was most extraordinary about this was that in Roman times, we are so used to burials in churches, since that's what Christians did. However, the Romans never did that, never. They always buried people along the sides of roads because they were not supposed to be buried inside a place where people were living, since this would pollute that area. So they buried them alongside of the road. So I was asking myself, why would they have buried 2 people under the floor of a temple, a pagan temple, when this violated all their normal rules? Now, of course, we don't know the answer to this, but I thought, hey, what if I write a book about this? So what I did was I started writing the first book of the series, which deals with the 2 young people who were buried there. And then I wrote the second book, which deals with their children. This is the twins you see in this book that I wrote. Now, if you go to Lullingston in England, you can actually see the skeleton of the young man who was buried there. He's still available. You can still see him. I'm not sure how I feel about displaying skeletons of dead people, but they do, you know.
Okay.
So anyway, so this is how the book started. I decided to write the story and see if I could invent something that would explain why all this happened.
Okay. Well, so there's a 3rd book, the 3rd in the series, that you have not, you've written the first. We published the second. And the third
Right.
one hasn't been written yet. Is that right?
It's being written at the moment.
Okay.
I have about maybe 1,000 words at the moment, not much yet.
Okay. So we're kind of doing what they did with Star Wars. We're starting in the middle, and then
Exactly.
we're gonna become famous and blow it up that way, and then we'll have to decide if we're gonna do the prequels or the postquels.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I think the third book should be even more interesting in some ways because, of course, what I've done at the end of the second book is to violate history because in our history, Constantine did not get murdered. In this book, he did.
Hmm.
So, what will follow that? So, we have a sort of a situation where in the first book, it's a pure historical novel.
Uh-huh.
The second book ends with uh, something you can call alternate history. And the third book will be completely alternate history. So it's an interesting progression. I don't know if anyone's ever done this kind of thing before. I didn't intend to do it, I just did it. But this is such a very interesting period in Roman history. I don't know how much you know about it, but it's a very interesting period because everything changed at this time, and
Yeah,
it could have
so
gone any way.
sure. One of the things that had never really occurred to me before reading your book, well, I knew that the Romans had held large parts of Britain, but it had never really occurred to me that they lived there in any numbers. I just always kind of imagined in my head that soldiers went up there and conquered things for a while and set camp and then went home. And it just never even dawned on me that there was a Roman civilization in Britain at that time.
Right, right. There was. There are dozens and dozens of villas. Um, and if I don't know if you've ever heard anything called Time Team. It's a British show which deal with the archaeology of Britain.
No.
And I would suggest you have a look at the episodes because they are fascinating. Anyway, you'll see that there was a very, very strong Roman presence in Britain. Um, to such an extent that people were actually assimilated into the Roman civilization. Now, it wasn't just people who came from other parts and settled there, but also British people who, who essentially Romanized their lives so that they lived as Romans, they laid mosaics, they ate like Romans, and they farmed like Romans. So there was a very strong Roman civilization made up of both immigrants and local people who had become Romanized. And all this was in the context where the original Celts were still there.
Hmm.
Um, and still speaking their own language. So I would guess that there was a lot of bilingualism between the Celtic language, which ultimately became Welsh, of course, and Latin, which was the language used by these Romanized people as well. So there was a lot going on there. Rome was interesting because it didn't try to destroy the civilizations at all that they found. Instead, what it tried to do was to assimilate them. It was much safer for them to make people loyal to Rome so that they could become Romans too. Because then they join their army, they would pay taxes, they would serve as administrators, all this kind of stuff. So this was what the Romans did all through the empire. You were a Roman if you acted like a Roman, not because you were born in Syria or whatever. In short, where you were born didn't matter. What did matter was, did you act like a Roman? In fact, the Severan dynasty was from North Africa. It didn't matter to the Romans. They became emperors. And in fact, the end of the Severan dynasty was the beginning of the period in which my books are set, because that was when everything started to fall apart. There's something called the crisis of the 3rd century. I don't know if you've ever heard about it. If you do, look it up and see. What happened was that the Severan dynasty, the last emperor of the Severan dynasty from North Africa, named Alexander Severus, was assassinated by his troops in 235. And this caused a real upheaval through the empire, because the Romans didn't have a set way of passing on power. This is one of the things they lacked. There was no primogeniture in Roman life. So if an emperor died, it was up to everyone. They could, seize power if they were generals or whatever. So for the next 50 years, there was unbelievable upheaval as people tried to take control of the empire. In fact, at one point, the empire was split into 3 different parts. One part in the east, one part in Gaul and Britain, and the 3rd part, the center of the empire, until an emperor named Aurelian came along and unified them all. He, however, was also assassinated. So for another 20 years or so, there was fighting going on until Diocletian came along. And he managed finally to bring everything together. And my book starts in Diocletian's reign, towards the end of his reign, because he's getting old, he's getting sick, and he's trying to set up a situation whereby the empire can continue. So that's where my book is set, right at that point. And this was one of the most fascinating periods in Roman history, but also one of the most disastrous. They also had a plague at the same time, which was, and it's not clear what this plague was. People have made various conjectures. However, the symptoms seem to be similar to some kind of hemorrhagic fever, like for example, Ebola. And it killed huge numbers of people. So in the midst of all this, the social and political upheaval, this plague came along and killed in the millions, probably. Now, as I said, the second book is set at the start of what could be called a more Pacific period. This period is one where things have been brought together by Diocletian. He is now leaving his empire to a number of different people in order to make sure that it continues. In fact, his idea was the empire had become too big to be ruled by a single man. So he was going to put in place 4 different people to rule the empire. This is called the Tetrarchy. As it happened, of course, all this did was to make these people bitter enemies of one another, who wanted to try to take out the others so they could take control of the old empire. So his idea failed. But that's where we are in this book.
So I think that one of the things that I liked about the book was the attention to historical accuracy, and notwithstanding the fact that you kind of alter that at the end, as you said. So that'll make the 3rd book pretty interesting to see how you weave real history with the alternate history. But I still really did appreciate that, and I might be a little bit partial, being the publisher and all, but I kind of sensed overtones of um, I mean, this could be a movie is where I'm going. I mean, like this is at least like what Gladiator was. I mean, Gladiator was good, but I mean,
Hmm.
you've got a setting that people are not very familiar with. You got a certain amount of romance. You've got the woman scorned and other things. I'll just put it that
Yeah.
way. And you have some action scenes, and there's a lot of movies out there where they have the big armies clashing, and we don't quite have that. But neither did Gladiator, except
No.
for a little bit at the beginning. So I kind of the one thing that's a little bit different, and maybe um I guess we have time for you to kind of touch on this, is that you almost have two books. You have the book where it follows the young man, and you have the book where it follows the young woman, their
Hmm.
perceptions of things, and then you intermingle them. So you could
Hmm.
almost break them up into two different parts and make two different books, and they might work actually. Why don't you talk about your decision of why'd you want to proceed in that way?
Well, the the family whom I placed in this book are a peculiar family in that these people were, I suppose you'd call them pagans. However, they were believing pagans, and they were convinced that their gods actually did things for them.
Hmm.
And in the book I wrote, they do. Um, Now, one of the things this family has is that twins are born to them all the time. This is very unusual because twins are rare, but they are born all the time to this family because their two gods are twins. So that this is one of the signs that the gods are giving them a gift, or at least this is a potential sign that they might give them the gift. This always entails a male and a female. I've always had the view that the human race is always composed of two things, maleness and femaleness. And we won't talk about modern times and all the strange things people are doing nowadays, but that's my feeling. A complete human being is not just male or not just female. They are mixtures of them. And of course, we are different creatures who blend together. And so what I was trying to do was to write a book that showed that particular blending. Um, and it seemed important to me that the book should be written from male point of view and a female point of view. I mean, neither male or female in the book are weak people. However,
Right.
each has different strengths, and they are different kinds of things. And the thing I liked about it, well, I don't know if you know this, however, uh, the beginning actually mirrors the end in a very close fashion, if you think about it. However, you have to look for it to see how it does. Because in both cases, a woman kills a man.
Right. Right.
And this is part of the fact that women are not weak, they are just different. Men, of course, have much more physical strength, but they always complement one another. So a complete book, to my mind, will always have both male and female in it,
Hmm.
to my view.
So that was a very deliberate choice then.
Yes, it was an absolutely deliberate choice. And in a Roman society, it was very different from ours, remember. They,
Hmm.
they did not believe, as we did, that things were predestined. And they had different views about what was sacred.
Hmm.
In fact, I can pick up a bowl here. I have this. I don't know if you can see it,
Yep.
but this is something. This is a replica of a bowl, well, a cup from Roman Britain. But note, if you look closely, you'll see that actually this particular motif over here is a male penis. Now, to our eyes, that would be absolutely obscene. But to the Romans, it wasn't, neither to men or women, because it was a symbol of regeneration. And you can only regenerate if you have a man and a woman.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very common theme of paganism in general, kind of almost wherever you find it.
Yeah. So anyway, this book was very, very deliberate. I mean, I didn't plan the book out, but it just felt right that it had to be given from two different points of view. Now, I don't know how people are going to like this, of course, because I have the view that a good book is one that entertains.
Yeah.
I mean, if I also incidentally educate people, that's great. But the main point of a novel is to entertain. And that's what I want people to find in this book, entertainment. So I hope it works.
Yeah, me too. So I feel that just to touch on that a little bit more is that you would have been able to write from the male point of view, bringing your own experience as a man to it. Have you asked your wife if you represented womanhood accurately?
Well, she's read the whole book at least 3 times.
Okay.
And she had told me a lot of things I should not say, and I've changed them. Because
okay.
Women think differently from men. They act differently from men.
Yeah.
So I want this to be a genuine representation of a woman at that time. But it's also worthwhile remembering that in Roman times, things didn't function like they do now. I mean, there were all these very strange beliefs, like, for example, what could happen to a woman who was menstruating, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, this was very weird. They believe, for example, that a menstruating woman could go into a field with bugs in it, and all the bugs would fall out of the crop and die on the ground, which of course strikes us as insane. But they believed in the power of womanhood. That's something you have to remember. This may be ridiculous to think this would actually happen in real life, but if you think about it, what they are saying is that a menstruating woman doing the most female thing she can is a powerful creature. She is not a weak creature, she's a powerful creature. This was Roman view. This is not ours. But you can see how it is. I mean, I have been steeped in Roman civilization since I was a little boy. And I have tried as much as I can to make everything fit their particular worldview and be accurate historically. I mean, even to the extent of the strange ritual that were involved in freeing a slave, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I think if you're going to write a novel, you need to do that kind of research, because your novel has to feel real. It has to feel as if there is verity in it. It isn't just a 21st century person looking back and deciding what they felt.
Yeah.
It's rather trying to go back and see what they actually would have felt. And it's often very alien. I mean, if you notice in my book, for example, there's complete indifference to slavery.
Yeah.
Which is understandable. They were indifferent to slavery.
Yeah.
And you can't make them anything else without making your book false.
Yeah, in today's era, authentically representing 350 AD is a crime. You're not even allowed to do it. You got to lie about it.
Yeah, no, you aren't. And this is something that we are losing nowadays because we are all the time claiming that somehow our worldview is just the only one decent people could hold. These were decent people, no, but they saw nothing wrong with slavery. It just was part of their life.
So Anthony, we have some people who popped in here. Do you happen to know them?
I don't know.
Well, yeah, Anthony, this is Susan Haynes from Eastern, and my husband, Mark Boone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. I just saw the link that Helen put up, so I was curious to pop in. I haven't crafted a question, but I do have a question that's not crafted. But
well, that's absolutely fine. Just we're gonna have to wrap this up in 3 minutes and either decide to start a new meeting or wrap it up. So, but you have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll make it fast because I came in when you were talking about male and female, the differences. And I was struck by Jordan. I don't know if you've heard this. Jordan Peterson recently, or I don't know, on the web somewhere, talked about the overlap between female and male human is greater than the differences, but where the differences lie are on the extremes. So you've got like a normal curve over the various characteristics. And so the mean of all those characteristics, fairly close. It's different, but it's at the extremes. Like men,
right?
If you choose for aggressiveness at the far end of aggressiveness, you'll get more men coming out of. That's why there are more men in prison populations. That's his explanation. So I'm just wondering if that sort of statistical extreme played into your representation of male versus female.
Before you answer that, Anthony, I think this justifies lengthening the meeting. Don't you think? There's no way you're gonna be able to answer that very well quickly. So
okay.
Well, why don't we just I'm gonna end the recording, we'll end the meeting, and then I'll relaunch the meeting and just in like 2 minutes just come right on back in. Is that okay?
Okay.
That's okay with
that's
me.
Fine.
That's okay. I'll get my husband to plug in my computer for me.
All right. Let's stop recording. Here goes. Okay, fire away.
What, you want me to restate my question?
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll try to be coherent. So I came in on your first meeting when Anthony was talking about how important it was to him to have both a female, I guess, mental processes as well as the male mental landscape or viewpoint depicted. And I was wondering about the if Anthony, if you looked at the extremes on the tails of the outlying section of the characteristics of male females, a la Jordan Peterson, who just revealed this to me the other day when I was watching one of his podcasts, that there's more overlap between male and female across the various psychological characteristics that they look at than there is differences. But at the extremes of the tails, then that's where you really see one sex or the other populate the far end of the tails. And so I was wondering if you took advantage of that, or if that had any impact on the way you thought about how to represent your characters.
Well, I know about this because I have always been interested in this topic, and it's perfectly true. If you look at males versus females, there are far more idiots who are male, and
says you. Now we're talking conditional probability here. Okay.
Sounds right to me.
Also, far more geniuses who are male. And I don't know why that is, but it seems to be exactly what you're talking about. The two extremes. Women seem to be more in the middle. But of course, this book is set in the later Roman period. So things like intelligence were never even conceived of at that point. And I think what struck me most was that if you look at males and females at this time, you'll see that they had different powers, not in the mystical sense, but well, just to take an example, one of the things that drives this book is that a woman is raped. Now, in theory, you can rape a man, but in practice, it really doesn't happen much, unless it's a man doing it. So it has to be a man doing it to someone else, and normally it's to a woman. And the worst part is that when that happens, a woman is helpless to control her body. She may or may not become pregnant. That depends on luck. And this is the issue which in fact to some degree drives this book, because by bad luck she becomes pregnant. And of course, in this society, a woman's pregnancy is not hers alone. It belongs also to her family. In fact, a woman, if she was raped, this was not so much an injury to her, so much as an injury to her family. So that the family had the responsibility to take revenge. And this is where it's different from modern times, because it's seen as a personal insult to a woman to be raped. But in Roman times, it was a familial insult. And everyone owed their family the responsibility to take revenge.
We're going to have to be careful, or we're going to give away the book.
Could you,
it's true.
Couldn't you say that it's the rape? I mean, it seems in my recollection that back then the idea was that the woman was a vessel for the seed. And so a rape would actually can be thought of as a property crime rather than as an insult against a family. Because they're damaging the vessel, right?
Well, that is a modern view. The Romans saw it as a familial crime. In fact, if you look at Roman law, it again and again emphasized the fact that this is an insult to the family. And the family has a right to take whatever particular steps need to fix this problem. They can demand money from the family, they can demand death even. But it's the family's responsibility. It's not property. A woman was not property to the Romans, remember. This is something that comes later. A woman was a member of a family. In fact, in Roman times, a woman could own property in her own right. She even had the right to divorce her husband by her own will. She didn't have to ask permission. She could just divorce him all by herself. And that was not so later on.
You mean
in Roman, yeah.
Later on, you mean after the Romans?
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, in Christian times, for a woman to divorce her husband was incredibly difficult. Whereas in Roman times, it could be done just by her choice.
So
that was the big difference.
Yeah. This story is placed in Roman Britain, like just before the Romans absconded.
Well, Boadicea reacted rather badly when her daughters were raped by the Romans.
Well, anything where the woman was forced without her will, that was rape. And her family was the one injured. Not her.
So we have reached the overall hour mark, and I'm sure that I can tell that everyone here are the kinds of people who would love to talk for hours about these kinds of things.
There's a overabundance of professorial types here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it'll please you greatly to know that we want to do more of these as well. But I wanted to get started and get Anthony talking about the book and sharing details about it. And we're glad some folks came to hear about it and see him talk about it firsthand. Anthony, why don't you just wrap it up in 5 to 10 minutes, and we will let them have a pop in with a comment too. But tell us about the writing process as an artist. At a personal level, what has this meant to you?
Well, I'm a retired professor now, and I have had two loves in my life. One is history. The other one is linguistics. I have spent my professional life doing linguistics as a professor. And when I retired, I decided I was going to fulfill the other part of my life, which was the historical part. And I decided that I would write books about things that I loved. And I would write novels. The reason why I like writing novels, or at least why I thought I would like writing novels, is because you can write without being interrupted by anyone else talking to you. This is one of the weird things about writing. When you write, there's only you there.
Yeah.
So you can say things that you would normally never say to another person because you'd end up in some kind of argument, or perhaps they would agree with you. It doesn't really matter. The point is you are having a dialogue, whereas when you write, you're doing it for yourself. And that is a very satisfying thing. I felt like I would go to my desk, sit down and write, and I would experience the pleasure of producing new worlds, new things that had never occurred before. I would create characters, but the important thing was that I would create people who, on paper anyway, were real. They actually acted like they should have acted, not how I thought they should act. There really is something like the muse. You don't necessarily write what you think you should write. Instead, you find that the writing takes control of you. And I found that happening with this book in spades, because a lot of the things that happened, I did not plan to do. They just somehow came out of the writing. Yeah. So I found this a very satisfying thing, but also in some ways a very interesting phenomenon, because I had not realized how much writing was like that.
Interesting. All right. That seems like, did you guys want to comment on that, or?
No. It seems to me that instead of just having one person at a time come into your office hours, you're in the middle of arguing with all your characters, but I'll defer to the person who has experience actually writing. That would be Anthony there.
Well, all I can say is characters are real. As you write them, they are very real. These people became very real to me, even though I know they probably never existed. But in my mind, they did exist in a 4th century Roman Britain. I mean, these are real characters to me.
Well, I can resonate with that. The philosophical way of looking at it is it's sub-creation. So it's the creator and then the sub-creation, but it's still a reality. It's just not the same level and kind of reality as our own.
Yeah.
And so I take offense when people say, well, that's just fiction, as though fiction isn't real. Fiction is real. Yeah. It's sub-real.
Yeah. And fiction, these when I wrote these people, I always had in the back of my mind, could these people really have existed? And would they have acted as they acted in my book? And if the answer was no, I rewrote it.
Okay, good.
And that's the important thing, I think.
So this has been great. I'm really glad that that we had some people to come in and give some fresh ideas. Otherwise, it's just going to be me with my list of things that I'm interested in, which one always hopes others are. But we're gonna do more of these, and I think especially after people have had a chance to read the book, we're gonna be able to get more feedback and thoughts that are tied to the book, which will make for some interesting conversation. But I want to say, I want to put a thought in your mind there, Anthony. Earlier, I mentioned how to me this would be like, this is like movie material. This is like the Gladiator with a twist. I want you to think about who you would want as your lead actress. And the lead, don't tell me now, not now. Save it for the next one. You've got twins, so you got to pick a guy and a girl.
Well,
okay.
I mean, all I know is that the girls I tend to love tend to be too old to fight this role.
Good
right,
answer.
well, no
Good
spoilers.
answer.
No spoilers. All right. Well, that seems like a good note to go out on.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Susan,
much
for coming in.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you. Nice to see you again. Bye. Ciao. Ciao.
Bye. Bye.
It's